Hi, I'm Mike Thomas, the author of The Secret of the Hidden Scrolls. And first of all, I want to thank each of you for being part of the launch team. Y'all are doing a great job of getting the word out. And as part of the activities in the launch team, you could ask me any questions you wanted to. So I have made a collection of those questions, and I'm going to answer them in this video. First, we're going to start with Sue. Sue asked, who inspired you to write these children's books and why? This all started with a book report. It was with my youngest son, Peter. At the time, he was in third grade. And I looked at the book report list and I was thinking I would like to have something kind of adventurous, but would also help him grow in faith. And I just couldn't find anything in the list. So I went to the local bookstore thinking, well, maybe they'll have something there. And so there was lots of books for his age group, but I still just could not find anything that would help him grow in faith and him enjoy reading it. So I decided to write one for him. So I spent several weeks writing the book out, and when I was done, I thought, okay, let me read it to him. And so I read it to him, and he really liked it. And I knew he liked it because he said, hey, Dad, why don't you read this to my class? I'm like, ooh, hadn't really thought about that. And so I decided to read it to his class, and his class liked it. So I read it to another class and another class. And then I would see some of the kids in the hallway, and they would ask me, hey, when's the next book? When's the next book coming out? And so that is what kind of started my journey on this series, The Secret of Hidden Scrolls. Here's the second question. This one is from Rebecca. Have you always had a desire to write? The answer is yes. Even as a young child, I would ride the city bus to a bookstore in the local mall. And I would spend hours in that bookstore just looking through all the books. I would look at, I love C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and all those, and they just inspired me. They became my heroes. And so as I grew older, a lot of times you want to emulate your heroes. You want to be like them. So I thought, well, why don't I write books? But one of the problems came along, especially I was growing up through elementary and high school, I was not a good speller. I was what I think Thomas Jefferson would call a creative speller. And so I did not do well in my writing projects because I would get marked off for spelling. And I would be afraid to use words because I couldn't spell them. And so I kind of tucked away that dream of being a writer. And then several years ago, this amazing invention called spell check came along. And it kind of reignited my imagination on maybe I could write. Spelling doesn't matter anymore. They'll correct it. The computer itself will correct it. And so that's when I started dabbling with writing again. And so yes, I've always wanted to be a writer, but didn't really take it seriously until a few years ago. Here is the third question, and this one is from Connor. His has two parts. One is, did God tell you how to write the books? I believe God did help me write the books. As a Christian, I believe the Holy Spirit is within me and helps me through life in general, but also in the small things. And also know that God is a creative God, and that He can create anything. He created everything. So as long as I am close to God and connecting with Him, I think it helps my being able to write these books. And every time when I sit down in the morning to write the books, I pray that God will help me. I say, let my words be acceptable in your sight. Provide the way that you would like me to write this so that I can help kids around the world connect with you better. The second part of this question is, how many books are in the series? Right now, there are 9 books scheduled to be in the series. I've actually written a synopsis and a summary for all 9 books, so I have an idea of where it's going, what's going to happen. So right now, there are 9 books scheduled to be in the series. Here's the next question. This is from Robin. Where do you think Mary, and Peter will go next. I know where they're going to get it next because I'm actually writing the third book right now. I'm actually halfway through it. So I know exactly where they're going. And since you are part of the launch team, I'm going to give you a little top secret information here. They are going to Egypt. So they will be experiencing the 10 plagues and all that. So it is an exciting story. It's fun to write so far, and I can't wait to see how it ends up, what happens to Peter and Mary and Hank. Here's the next question. It is from Joyce. What is your writing process? Do you plan or just write as ideas, characters, and plots come to mind? That is a great question. Let me explain to you my writing process. First, I start with research. And by research, I mean the Bible. So I start with the story that I'm going to write about, the story that they're going to travel back in time and be in. And I read that story over and over and over again. I want to be so familiar with it that it's like I'm there. And so when I can get there, I'm like, okay, now I can put Peter, Mary, and Hank there and see what happens. So I do research by reading the story over and over again. I also will do research about the things around that, like on the book of creation. I study a lot of the science of creation and things like that. For Noah's Ark, I actually went and visited Ark Encounter, which is a theme park that has like an actual size ark, and it is amazing. It was really neat to get into the ark, to see everything. So it was very inspiring to walk through that and help me write the book. Also, like on this one about Egypt, I'm looking at a lot of things about ancient Egypt, hieroglyphics, mummies, things like that. So I do research like that. The second thing I do is write. And in writing, I always handwrite first. This is my little book. These are Moleskine. I like these. I will handwrite the first draft. So let me back up one step. I will plan and plot out what the story is going to be about. I have an idea of how it's going to start, what's in the middle, how it's going to finish, and then I kind of break it down by chapter and say what's going to happen in each scene in each chapter. And so once I have that, that's where I start handwriting out each chapter. So I will start page 1 and just start writing by hand. I will usually try to get through several chapters before I will go back and start typing them in. And that first kind of type in, I'll do a little editing, but I try to get a whole kind of first draft done. And so after I get that done, I will go and read it. I will read it to classes that have the ages of the students that are going to be reading the book. And so I'll read it to first graders, second graders, third graders, and fourth graders. And I will sit in front of them, read it, and I will look at the reactions. I will see maybe this part they're not getting, maybe this part's a little slow, and I'll just kind of cross it out on the page. And so I will use my first layer of editing right in front of the students out in the field. And so after I do that, then I will send that draft to the publishers, and then they will have a professional editor go through it, and then we'll kind of go back and forth, just really getting it to the finished product. So that's the basic writing project. First is research, then I write it, then I read it to students and to kids in the age range, and then we do the final editing. This next question is from Diane. How long does it take to write one book in a series? It takes about 2 to 3 months. That's about as long as it's taken on the ones I've written. Usually there's about a month of research and kind of planning and plotting it out. And then there is about a month and a half of writing it, that first draft. And then there's about a month of kind of reading it and editing it and going back and forth and getting that finished product. She says, Diane has a second question. Do you have another job? Yes, I do. I have a full-time job other than writing. Like most new writers, you can't count on writing to pay the bills. And so you do your full time job or other responsibilities you might have. And what you have to do is you have to find time uh, to write. You have to fit that into the schedule that you already have. And so for me, I write early in the morning. I get up about 5 or 5:30, spend a couple hours in. I usually will start by reading the Psalms, and then I will listen to music. I love listening to Carrie Job, and then I will write. And usually when I'm writing, I will listen to Indiana Jones soundtrack. Here's her third question. How did you get a publishing deal with Worthy? Well, first of all, I started self-publishing, and so that was kind of the easiest way to get something in print, just to see how the kids like it, if it's going to sell. And so I started just in a very localized, just in my area, doing that just to see if it worked. Because I thought if I can't make it work locally, how can I pretend that it'll work everywhere else? So I did that. Then I talked to a friend of mine who's in the book industry and asked him what I needed to do to get the books out there. And he said, for children's books, you need them to be published by a regular publisher. And so how do you do that? And he said, well, first you got to get an agent. So I said, well, how do you do that? He said, I'm not sure. So I did find an agent. And then the agent at that point, we worked out the books, and he really helped me put together, how many books are in the series, put together the proposal, the packaging. And then he sent those out to a few publishers that we thought would be good for this book. And Worthy was a perfect fit, and so that's who we went with. So that's how I got my publishing deal with Worthy. Next question is from Donna. How do you select the names of your characters? The main characters are Peter and Mary and Hank, and those names are easy. Peter is my son, and the character is actually based on him. Mary is my niece, and the character is based on her. And Hank is my dog. So, character is based on Hank. So those were easy, and it actually made it easy because I would kind of put them in a situation and say, what would they do? The other characters are not that hard either because most of them are based on the actual characters in the Bible stories. So I just named them after the characters in the Bible story. Great Uncle Solomon, he's a fictitious character that I made up, that he goes and stays with. And he is an older guy who's wise and helpful and has good intentions. But the main thing about him, he was wise. And so I wanted to have a name that sounded wise. And so I thought, why not Solomon, who is the wisest man in history? So that's how Great Uncle Solomon got his name. Next question from Donna is, what was your hardest scene to write? For me, the hardest scene to write is always the first scene. Because I want to write something that immediately grabs the kids' attention and makes them want to keep reading. In the first book, the hardest scene was the first day of creation, where the kids were just floating out in nothingness. And so that, when you read the story in the Bible, there's not a lot of help there. There's not a lot going on. So it's like, okay, what do I do with that? And so for me, that was kind of the hardest scene in the book, was writing that scene where they were floating in nothingness. Next question. This one is from Rebecca. And she says, the angel Michael acts as the kid's guide. Where did you get the idea to have Michael play this role? The idea of Michael didn't come along until I actually got to the third or fourth chapter of book 1. And it's where the kids were floating around the water. There was nothing but water. It was that day of creation. And so I was like, somebody's got to help them. How are they going to survive this? And so I was like, somebody's got to rescue. It's like, who can rescue them? And so I kind of thought through, and I also knew that later in the book, they were going to have to face the serpent and Satan. So I was like, they need someone that's going to be with them that is strong and helpful and powerful. And so when I looked in the Bible, the perfect match for me was Michael the archangel, because if you look in Revelation, he was actually the one that battled Satan and is the head of the angel armies of God. So I thought, okay, Michael's it. He's the perfect one. Here's the last question. This is from Diane. Do your children appreciate your book? Have they read them? Yes. As I mentioned earlier, Peter did appreciate the book. He appreciated them so much he wanted me to read them to everybody. So yes, he appreciated them. I do have two sons. I have Peter, who's the youngest, and Peyton is my older son, and he is actually going to be a senior at the University of Mississippi at Ole Miss. So he's a little out of the age range for the book, but he has read them and really likes them. And I use him as kind of a sounding board. And in fact, this summer he's in California, and I sent him the first 3 chapters of the book I'm writing right now, and he read them and gave me comments back and things like that. So yes, they're both involved with the books, and it's very helpful. And so what I'm hoping for, with The Secret of the Hidden Scrolls, is that not only will my children like them, but children all over the world. And so I want to thank you for being part of the launch team to make that possible.